So in part 3 we're going to be looking at how we can grow some hair on an object, and of course the most easiest way to start to do this is to work just off a sphere, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to select a primitive and we're going to go to the display at the top left and just make sure that we can see the lines, so you can see how many polygons we've got on there. Now obviously if you're going to be growing guides from this object, you can see here that we've got the pole at the top, and it's kind of awkward really to be using this as a good piece of geometry. So what I would do is I would change it to another type, say for instance this type of sphere, so that it distributes the polygons out a little bit different. There's all different ones in here. I'm going to go for something quite simple like this, so that would do quite fine. Now initially the more polygons that you've got on your object, the more guides are going to be generated. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to convert this into an editable object, and we just go up to the top left here, we'll press the C key, and then it basically is no longer a parametric object. So I want to select some polygons, and we could just simply select one half of the sphere or a certain selection of polygons. But I find it's easier to work in strips of polygons because it gives me much more control, and it will also enable me to demonstrate just how much control we've got over just a few guides. So as I said, I could just select the whole object and apply all the guides to it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the top left and I'm going to have a live selection, and I'm going to make sure we're in polygon selection. You can see there at the left hand side, and then I'm just going to drag around just a small selection. You hold down the control key, we can deselect, and the shift key we can select more. Okay, and that will do for now. What I now do is I will go to the add hair, and then you'll see that the guides are going to be added on the vertices of the selected polygons. In my particular case, I don't particularly want even as much as I've got here. Don't even need it to start with anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now move on to the selection tools. So we're in the selection tools here, and I've got the live selection enabled, and the type of selection I want is going to be from here, which is the guides. It's going to enable me just to simply click over any part of the guide and it will select it. So now I've selected it, I'm going to press delete, and I'm also going to select all but the end guides and delete them as well. So at the moment we've just got two guides, and we're going to have a lot of control between these two guides. It really does emphasize on the degree of control we've got just by how little I can use. So the next thing is I want to actually see some kind of hair being shown in the viewport, so I get an idea of what the guides are actually doing to the hair. So to do this we have to select the hair object, which is in the top right, and then when we go to the editor tab we can change the display from showing just guidelines to hairlines. And the detail is going to enable us to set the density of this. I'm going to set it lowish just so that we got full performance in the viewport, but to be quite honest with you, it's pretty good in Cinema 4D for performance regarding hair. I can normally get away with having quite a lot. So as you can see from this, we've got two guides highlighted in blue, and in between the guides we've got the hair, which is basically making up from the polygon selection. So moving over to the guides tab, we can see here that it's the polygon selection which it's basically working off as to where it's going to be applying these hairs, and the polygon selection is based upon the selection set, which is what originally was made as soon as I clicked on add hair. So when you've got the polygon selected and then you click on add hair, then a polygon selection is going to be automatically made and added to this link. Now the polygon selection is actually on the sphere itself, and you can see it by this triangle. You can see it there, and that's all it is. And we can add as many polygon selections as we want, so that we can have more control over multiple hair objects. For now, we're just going to stick with just the one. So for the guides, we've got how many guides we've got at the moment, which is 2, and how many segments, which is basically how many times it's going to be split up between where the root is and where the tip is, so that we've got more of a smoother transition between the beginning and the end of the guide. If you push it above 2, you can see here that it starts to randomly add more guides within that polygon area, which is not something that I want. So I'm going to stick just to 2 for the moment there. So when we move over to the hairs, this is anything to do with the actual hairs that are being produced and nothing to do with the guides themselves. So we've got control separately for the guides and the hairs. Now the hairs, some simple things here is the count. At the moment it's going to render 5,000 hairs. The segments, much like the guides, is how many times it's going to split each segment of the hair from the root to the tip, so it appears to be more smooth in the bends of the hair. So now that we've looked at these two here, not going on any further than this, what I'm going to now do is apply dynamics. Now before I apply dynamics, I need to make sure that the guides interact correctly with the sphere. In other words, we want it to collide with the sphere and not go through it. So to do this, we had what's called a collider tag to the sphere object. So we select the sphere objects, right click, and then we've got all of these tags which are all features for Cinema 4D. The ones we're interested in is in the hair tags, and we just simply select hair collider. We've got a few options here which we're not going to be going into. That's enough for now. We're just going to go back to the hair object again, and now we're going to be applying dynamics. Now, as I mentioned, there's two ways of applying dynamics. We can simply press the play button. You can see there that it just drapes the hair. Now, the reason why you can't see the guides draping is because at the moment we're in the live selection tool of the hair selection tools. If we go back up and take it off the polygon selection back to the object selection and then press play, then the guides will drop. I'm just going to deselect anything I've got on here at the moment. So press the spacebar to deselect any tools, and now you can see the guides are now following down. So we'll just press play, and there we go. Now you'll notice at the moment is that each time it gets to the end of the timeline, it resets. So what we can do is we can simply go through the timeline to the point where we think that we'd like it to be. Say for instance we say we'd like it to be there as our initial starting point, and then we can click on the set as dynamics, or we can take the timeline back to the beginning and press on the dynamic interaction, and then we just press on redraw, and there we go. This is a little bit slower than pressing the play, but it gives you more interactivity of what's going on with this. So that's quite nice to be able to go around the object and really have a look and see how things look. And it includes dynamics, gravity, stiffness and collisions. And basically the time interval is to how often it's going to update. So the higher you increase this, the more dynamic it's going to basically appear. If you were to get the object now and just move it about, you can see now that we've got real-time dynamics of the guides, or shall I say for the hairs. It's going to appear to be more slow because its milliseconds is 116. If you were to take this right down, it would obviously take more resources on your computer, but you'll find that it updates more often. So I'm going to basically leave it at that for the moment. And I'm just going to go to the guides in our hair object, and I'm just going to increase the segments. And you'll notice that as I increase the segments, it's going to smooth out the guide. I'll just focus on this one here. But it will also allow the hair to drape closer to the body of the object. Okay. So we're just going to increase that. This is the segments for the hairs, and we're going to increase the segments for the guides. And now you see that it's going to drape right against the hair. Okay. Now, as you can see here, it's not really ideal that it kind of drapes that close to the geometry. It's doing its job, but we want to have a little bit more control. So what we do is we go to the Dynamics tab for the hair object, and then we can select the surface radius. So when we increase the surface radius, what it will do is it will start to push out the guides from the root further out from the surface. So as you can see there, it gives us that nice option to be able to do that, which is pretty good. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but what you can rest assured is that we can style the hair in any way we want and then not have the dynamics completely flatten out all of our style to drape like it is now. I will go into that a little bit later on. So the next thing I want to sort of look at really is go back into the guides here, and you can see here that as I increase the guides, you may get some problems with the way that it's actually dropping and flying all over the place. This comes down to the options we've got in the dynamics, and basically we can have the steps being taken up and it will start to behave itself more and more and more. As you can see there, by increasing the steps, it's starting to behave itself. So this is basically giving it more to work with. So I'm going to leave the guides like that for the moment, and I'm just going to turn off redraw, and then I'm going to click on set as dynamics. Now this is the beginning stage of where we can start to style from, if that's where you choose to style from, that is. So I'm going to jump now basically to another way of adding hair guides. So we've obviously added hair guides automatically and removed some. Now I want to add some manually. So I'm going to go to the add guides, and you can see here we've got this radius for this brush. The radius will set basically how big of an area we're going to be working off, and the count as to how many guides it's going to be planting down per click. I want to add only one guide in a radius of 0, which means it's going to put it exactly where I want it. So I'm going to put one roughly in the middle. You can see that. And that guide in the middle is going to shoot straight out from the center there of where I've clicked it, which is fine if I want to obviously style that one individual guide. And this is an ideal way of doing it if you want to create a new selection and have it as an individual layer, you could say. It keeps it away from the rest of the guides. In this particular case, I want to turn on interpolated. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the hairs the guides that are available, and then create one similar to that. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see here that it's created one similar. Now you'll notice that after doing that all the hairs are gone. Well, if we go back to the hair again and we click on the guides, you'll notice that the root is now set to custom. I want to go to the root options and set it back to polygon area, and it brings back our hairs. This is something that happens every single time that we start to add individual hairs. So now that I've done that, we now can move on to the next video, which we're going to be looking at a little bit more about the guides, the length, the segments, and how we can do a little bit more editing to the hairs initially before we start to do any styling.